Welcome everyone to the Douglas Laboratories Educational Webinar Series. My name is Carla Higgins and I will be hosting today's webinar for Clean Athlete Hydration. Our speaker today is Dr. Kelly Heim. Kelly is a nutritional pharmacologist and Senior Director of Scientific Affairs for the Healthcare Practitioner Brands of Atrium Innovations, where he oversees the scientific integrity and safety of products by maintaining rigorous standards of research evaluation and its application to product formulation. Dr. Heim has a doctorate in pharmacology from Dartmouth Medical School and a Bachelor of Science in Nutritional Biochemistry from the University of New Hampshire. His academic research, invited reviews, and book chapters have traversed critical topics in nutrition and pharmacology. He has lectured extensively to practitioner audiences on nutritional genomics, bioavailability, and effective clinical application of dietary supplements. Thank you, Dr. Heim, and with that, I will turn the presentation over to you. Please hold all your questions until the end of the presentation, or you can also submit any questions to the GoToWebinar toolbar on the right-hand side under the questions drop-down box. Thank you.
Thank you, Carla, and I'd like to thank everyone for joining me today. I'm going to go through some common myths and facts about hydration and exercise performance, and some fundamental facts that will help you optimize your hydration protocol. Before I begin, I just want to disclose that I'm a paid advisor to Clean Athlete. I don't have any other conflicts of interest. This is not intended to substitute for medical advice. It's for educational purposes only. Whether you're a fitness enthusiast or a competitive athlete, you probably have asked yourself this question, probably many times. Should you rethink your hydration strategy? Water is the most important staple in an athlete's diet, but it's very easy to not optimize it to your individual needs. It's dependent on a variety of different factors. No two people will benefit from the exact same hydration strategy necessarily because there are so many different factors involved. But to get started in this discussion, I am showing you 6 bullet points here, and take a look at them. And if you answer yes to any one of these, then you should probably take a closer look at your current hydration strategy. For example, if you train for more than 1 hour at a time on a regular basis, that would be one reason. Another would be if you train indoors in warm, humid, or cold environments, which would be most environments. Thirdly, if you train at altitude anywhere above 5,000 feet above sea level. Fourth, if you're a salty sweater. And number 5, if you carry extra weight. And then finally, if you travel to compete, particularly air travel. So if you fly to different areas to compete or train, hydration becomes very important. Common hydration mistakes that athletes and generally active fitness enthusiasts make, or anyone engaged in physical activity that's intense or prolonged, are shown here. There are 4 big ones. The most common is drinking too little. Also, the problem of drinking too much has been highlighted in sports where there are harsh conditions, hot, humid conditions, and long durations of activity like marathons and hot weather. Drinking too much can lead to dilution of sodium in the blood. It's called hyponatremia. Thirdly, drinking the wrong beverage. Today, I'm going to focus on that. And then failure to individualize. Like I said, no two people are alike. No two people have exactly the same fluid needs. And that is a little bit more difficult to understand and arrive at your ideal protocol. But the 2 most common mistakes are 1 and 4. So collectively, those are the biggest mistakes that athletes make. Let's talk about dehydration and what that really means. It's pretty easy to identify dehydration. You just step on the scale. I'll go into that in a little bit more detail in a minute, but let's define what dehydration really is. It's anywhere above 2% of water loss based on body weight losses. So for a 125-pound female runner, for example, if she is 125 pounds before exercise and she loses 2.5 pounds, she's 122.5 pounds after a training session or a race, that's dehydration. That's a 2% water loss. Even a 1% water loss, that would be 1.25 pounds of weight loss, that can diminish physical and mental performance as well. So we're really dealing with mild losses of fluid causing decreases in physical and mental performance. 4 pounds of weight lost in a 200-pound athlete is another example of a 2% water loss. So the point I'm trying to make here is when you step on the scale and you've lost 1.5 pounds, if you're pretty lightweight, that's indicative of the immediate need to replenish fluids. So that's good enough reason to rethink your whole strategy. If you're running into that kind of weight loss day in and day out, there's something wrong. If you get up to 4 to 6%, this becomes very dangerous, and it can become fatal if you get to 6% or above. I often hear the term pre-race or pre-game. We talk about hydration. I like to ignore this term when talking about hydration strategies, because by the time you're a couple of hours into the pre-race period, it's too late to make up for any fluid deficits that you've incurred over the last few days. So pre-game or pre-race hydration really needs to start several days before, or ideally adopting a daily hydration strategy regardless of when you're going to compete. That's really where you want to start. So correcting the baseline problem would involve knowing what your hydration requirements are on a daily basis under normal conditions. So you can calculate it based on body weight. This is just a general idea of what your fluid needs are going to be. It's assuming that you're not living in a really hot, humid environment, that you're a healthy individual. This is just for any person. This isn't specific to athletes. This is a bare minimum for your hydration needs. So if you weigh 130 pounds, you take that, you divide it by 2, and that's how many fluid ounces per day you need to consume. And for a 280-pound athlete, that's a gallon a day, or 140 fluid ounces per day. So most of us fall within that range of 70 to 140 fluid ounces, or half a gallon to a gallon per day. So just think about a gallon jug, and you're going to want to drink anywhere between half of that or the full gallon jug per day. A lot of foods like fruits contain fluids, so that does count. Alcohol obviously does not count. That can have a diuretic effect. Caffeine, it can have a very strong diuretic effect in the beginning, but if you drink coffee every day and you don't change your dose, that's not really going to cause a lot of water loss. That's really not going to cause any water loss. So those are two things that often come up when looking at hydration needs in athletes. Urine color is a really easy way to determine where you are on the spectrum of hydration. So the thirst center in your brain, in the hypothalamus, is sensitive to changes in plasma volume and how thick your blood is. So the osmolality of your blood, or the thickness of your blood. So it's able to sense very, very accurately exactly where those values are. And when they are suboptimal, you will become thirsty. The thirst mechanism typically is not turned on until these values get into the area where dehydration is imminent. So they're not really reliable. Thirst, as you've probably heard before, is not the best indicator of your hydration status, but urine color is pretty good. It's pretty easy to look at your urine. So if you want to maintain an optimal hydration status, you want to remain within the colors shown in the top 3 boxes there. Feedback signals that inhibit your thirst centers include moistening of the mouth. So if you suck on an ice cube, for example, that's going to make you feel a little bit less thirsty. So keep that in mind. These feedback mechanisms and your sense of thirst can be influenced by a variety of factors that may make your sense of thirst not necessarily in line with your hydration status. Urine is a very, very good indicator of hydration. Factors that increase fluid needs are shown here. Heat and humidity, obviously we know this. Intensity and duration, we know this as well. Equipment and warm clothing. Hockey players wear a lot of clothing. They're in a cold environment, but because they wear so much equipment, they are prone to dehydration. Higher body weights. Athletes that weigh more. If you're a coach or a trainer, you just want to keep an eye on your heavier athletes because they're going to be much more likely to suffer decreases in performance because of mild dehydration. Air travel, as I mentioned, very common cause of dehydration you might not necessarily be aware of. You're not necessarily going to feel more thirsty on an airplane, but you are becoming dehydrated. Poor acclimatization is another cause of fluid losses. Heat acclimatization is basically a set of adaptations that help the body prepare for exertion and heat and tolerate hot and humid conditions with fewer adverse effects on the body, including fluid losses. Protocols along these lines typically involve an initial period of 5 days of strategic restrictions in training duration, just to allow the body to adapt to a hot and humid environment. So in other words, if you fly to a destination that's hot and humid and you're flying from a very dry, cool area, you want to give your body about a week to adjust. Dietary composition does affect fluid needs. High salt intake will increase your fluid needs. If you are on a low carb diet, you might have to drink more fluid. Health conditions can also affect fluid needs. Kidney health, for example, can affect fluid needs, and there are a variety of others. So these are 9 factors that increase fluid needs that you should know about. So I talked about pre-race, pre-game, and trying to put that term and just put it aside and focus on daily fluid intake. But that doesn't mean that we shouldn't talk about before, during, and after exercise, because these are great opportunities to fine-tune your hydration so that you can make sure that your performance is where it should be. So before exercise, typically 2 hours ahead of time, you want to drink anywhere between 14 and 22 ounces of fluid, and then 15 minutes before the start, 4 to 16 ounces. These values are based on recommendations from the American College of Sports Nutrition, looking at runners who are hydrated at the start. So this timeline, I want to emphasize, is taken from evidence that took athletes that were already well hydrated because they were consuming the adequate fluid amounts in the days prior. So these numbers might need to be higher if you weren't optimally hydrated the day before or 3 days before. These ranges are there just to allow for individual differences in tolerability. So runners might not feel comfortable drinking 16 ounces 15 minutes before a race, but 4 ounces is certainly better than nothing. There's a lot of trial and error involved in hydration, and I know that is one area that frustrates athletes. They just want a calculator that they could just figure out exactly what they need to consume, exactly when. But to be honest, there is really no way to substitute for your own experimentation, intuition, and relying on your knowledge and that of your coaches and trainers. During exercise, the range is 14 to 47 ounces per hour. Every 15 to 20 minutes is generally a pretty good interval for hydration frequency. So 4 to 12 ounces every 15 to 20 minutes. And then afterwards, so after means the entire day. So if you run a race in the morning, this means the whole day, and then the following day, 16 to 24 ounces per pound of body weight lost until your weight returns to normal. Sweat rates are highly variable, and this is one reason why every hydration program should be tailored to the individual. Most athletes lose anywhere between 16 and 64 ounces of fluid per hour, sweat per hour, in warm climates, and some athletes will lose quite a bit more. Sweat rate is highly variable. That depends on a lot of factors. First, it depends on the sport, depends on the activity. So water polo example is a little bit lower on the scale for general water losses. So half a liter per hour is the mean. And then soccer and rugby, much higher. American football players can lose much more than what is shown on this chart, just because of their high body weights and they're wearing so much equipment. And typically the football season starts in the middle of the summer, and the training intensity in the beginning is very, very high. To individualize fluid intake, the easiest, cheapest way to do it is to get a scale and just have access to an accurate scale, and then follow these 4 steps. You want to warm up for about 10 minutes to an intensity that represents what you typically do in training or in racing. And then you want to towel off and weigh yourself with no clothing Then you want to perform the exercise for at least 30 minutes. You want to put your clothes on before you do that. And then record the volume of any fluid that you do consume during that period, so that you can take it into the calculation, and make sure that you don't urinate. So you just want to make sure this is as accurate as possible. And then afterwards, you want to dry off and then weigh yourself again without clothing. This is kind of a pain to do depending on where your scale is and other circumstances. But once you do it a couple of times, you get a good average. That way, you can feel really confident that you know how much you lose during your typical activity, and you can really calculate that optimal hydration rate and volume that is tailored to your needs. So a 180-pound runner, for example, loses 2 pounds body weight over an hour and a half run. So that would be 32 to 48 ounces that he would need. For every pound lost, an athlete should consume at least half a liter of fluids. So 16 to 24 ounces generally is what you would need to consume. So a pint and a half, a pint to 1.5 pints. So there are a lot of different ways of expressing this, but if you want to take away one thing from this slide, if you feel confused, a pint per pound of body fluid lost or body weight lost. So a pound per pint, whatever you want to do. You could just remember that. If you're interested in the math, this is just looking at the individualization calculation. Take the weight lost in kilograms, you add the volume of fluid that you consumed during this test, and you divide it by the duration of the exercise that you just did based on the 4 steps I showed in the last slide. So, for example, you exercised for an hour, you lost 1 kilogram or 2.2 pounds. You consumed a liter during that time. Your rate of sweat loss or fluid loss is 2 liters per hour. A common myth is water being everything that you would ever need as far as your hydration beverage of choice. That is certainly true for some people, but it's not true for others. It's not always ideal, and one of the things I'm going to describe today so that you can take away after the webinar is water is appropriate sometimes, but when do you know and how do you know whether a hydration beverage is going to give you an advantage? Water is always going to be appropriate for short durations of 1 hour or less, unless you're a salty sweater, which I'll get into in a minute. But water should be your number one go-to source of fluid for a variety of reasons. First, it doesn't have any calories. It's clean, it's easy to get, it's cheap, so you should always start with water. But when should you think about a hydration beverage? First, let's talk about the 6 limitations of water. First of all, and some of you endurance athletes might have experienced this, late in a training run or a long race, if you're a cyclist or a runner, you probably have experienced this. You kind of lose your sense of thirst after a while, and you think that you're fine, but you're not. Your body's thirsty, but you don't feel it, and that's a result of loss of sodium. You might drink less overall just because of this, and you might drink less because you start to really lose your appetite in the later stages of a tough training session. If you're at altitude, you're going to lose your sense of thirst and your appetite even more readily. Thirdly, you run the risk of hyponatremia if you consume a lot of water in excess in a short amount of time. So if you lost a lot of sweat and sodium, you're just using water to replenish your fluids, you're going to dilute the sodium levels in your blood, which could be dangerous. The fourth limitation is water can never replete carbs or electrolytes. It's number 5. And then finally, it's not absorbed very, very fast compared to an oral rehydration beverage. So these are things to keep in mind when you're thinking about water versus a hydration beverage. There are a lot of hydration products out there. There are a lot of reasons to be totally confused when you're looking for one, and whether you're comparing one to another. You hear a lot of things that people use that they rave about. How do you know that this is going to be right for you? So how do you navigate this very difficult question? There are 8 features of a reliable hydration product. Number 1, osmotic concentration should be at a certain level. So osmotic concentration is also known as osmolarity, and this is the concentration of dissolved particles in a solution. And an easy way to visualize this is kind of the thickness of a liquid. So picture grape juice. next to lemonade. And the lemonade is going to have pretty low osmotic concentration, and the grape juice is going to be pretty thick and pretty high on the osmolarity scale. Secondly, 4 to 8% carbs. This is what you want to look at. You can't really see this on a label, so I'll talk about this in a minute. But you really want to look at a mix of different sugars and dextrins, and these are things I'll talk about in a minute. Sodium should be at 120 to 170 milligrams per 8 ounces. Potassium should be between 20 and 50 milligrams per 8 ounces. Number 6, no superfluous ingredients. You just don't want to have anything in there that you might not tolerate. And then 7, tolerability, and number 8 is taste. You can't really tell a whole lot from looking at a label. So this is one of the challenges that we all face. We don't really know a lot just looking at a label. We don't get a lot of this information. But you can look at 3 things: sodium, potassium, total carbs, and you can get pretty much enough information that you can probably make a decision. So sodium should be between 120 and 170 milligrams per 8 ounces, and this will actually enhance the taste of a beverage. We don't usually think of sodium enhancing taste, but it really does. And it will also improve the rehydration efficiency of the beverage, but you don't want it to be really high because then it can cause GI distress and it can actually make you more dehydrated because it will pull more fluid out of your blood into your gut, and that's the last thing you want happening during a race. Potassium is often part of the conversation regarding hydration beverages, but believe it or not, it's not all that important. You want to have some potassium in there because you do lose it through sweat, but it's not nearly as important as sodium. So sodium is often where athletes go wrong. They either get way too much or they don't get enough. And if you're not getting enough sodium, or if you're a salty sweater, if there is a deficit in your sodium intake somewhere in your day-to-day diet, or during or after or before a race, then sodium, I like to say, is often the unrecognized performance enhancer that nobody seems to be talking about, but they should. Total carbs, I mentioned a percentage, and you won't see a percentage on the label, but 13, that would be within the range. You want to look for 6% carbs. That would be 14 grams or less per 8 ounces. So if it's 14 grams or less, you're in that nice area. But if there are no carbs, then as I mentioned, you're really not getting the carbs that will help with replenishing lost glycogen, and also there is another advantage of carbs that I'll go into momentarily. What is not on the label? This is just as important as what is on the label. So tolerability and taste, you really don't know unless you try it for yourself. But who likes to do a lot of trial and error with respect to tolerability? I don't mind tasting a bunch of different samples, but I don't like testing things for tolerability. I want to know somehow that I'm probably going to like this beverage and it's going to sit well in my gut before I even try it. So how do you know that? Of course, you can't know just by looking at the label. Osmotic concentration is the only way to know. So let's talk about the absorption of sodium, glucose, and water before we continue along this line of discussion. So this is an up-close view of the lining of your intestine. So glucose and sodium are there in the lumen, and that's inside of your intestine, and they're there if you've just consumed a sports drink with those 2 ingredients in there. They're going to be absorbed through a transport protein called SGLT1. And this is a protein that takes both of those molecules and synergistically takes them and pumps them right into the cell and pumps them right into the capillary, into your bloodstream. This is the process of hydration, by the way, because the fluid follows these molecules into the blood. So you're transporting all the fluid that you're drinking into your bloodstream. So this is the act of hydration. That's the process of hydration. Water will diffuse across this barrier alone without this process happening, but it won't be as fast. So by using a sports beverage that contains sodium and glucose in the right amounts will enhance the hydration process by guiding more water into the bloodstream and out of your gut. And that's exactly what you want to support. So hopefully that makes sense. But if you want to just remember one thing, just make sure that your sports drink has 6%, 4 to 6% carbs and some sodium to support this process. I mentioned osmotic concentration as a measure of the thickness of a liquid. The absorption and tolerability of fluids, as I mentioned, is optimal when this value is optimal. So what is optimal? You want it to basically match your body fluid osmolarity. So that would be anywhere between 270 and 300 milliosmoles per liter. 270, 290, 275 to 295. It depends on what source you're looking at, what source of information. But if you're already dehydrated, it's going to be more towards the 300 mark. But if you're really, really well hydrated, it's going to be more towards 270. And there are natural individual variations within that range. But you want your sports drink to be somewhere in that range. Between 270 and 300 would be a good rule of thumb. So the problem with formulating hydration beverages is if you add sugars, if you add sodium, if you add potassium, if you add chloride, these all increase the osmolarity very, very significantly to the point that you are kind of walking this very fine line between developing a sports drink that's going to really provide a lot of these nutrients in dense amounts, but then you want it to be well tolerated and well absorbed. So you have to really arrive at a balance. So this is one of the challenges that Clean Athlete has recently successfully navigated by looking at a complex carbohydrate as an ingredient. I'll talk about that in a minute. You want to avoid excessive sodium, potassium, and chloride. They are definitely going to increase the osmolarity because they're charged particles. And whenever you have a charged particle, you make the liquid a little bit denser, and there's more osmotic pressure, not as easily absorbed. Secondly, adding complex carbs to higher carb solutions will allow you to enrich the carbohydrate content without upsetting the osmotic balance of the solution. But carbohydrates that are complex, sometimes they don't taste good, sometimes they're expensive. They can be challenging for manufacturers to integrate. So that has been one of the challenges in the industry. Thirdly, you want to avoid ingredients that shouldn't be in there and that might upset the tolerability profile. So artificial flavors, colors, sweeteners, vegetable oils, etc. As I mentioned, sodium is a performance-enhancing mineral. It's the most important ingredient in your hydration beverage. Sweat contains anywhere from 400 to 1,500 milligrams of sodium per liter. That's a huge range. So if we talk about salt intake in the United States, the 2015 to 2020 dietary guidelines, the federal guidelines, recommend that people limit their sodium intake to 2,300 milligrams per day. That's 1 teaspoon of table salt. Somebody who loses a lot of sodium through sweat, a salty sweater, can potentially lose this entire amount in just 1 hour of exercise in hot, humid conditions. So it's going to be really important for these individuals to consult with a dietitian and use food as the primary method of replacing and optimizing sodium status. So sweating, as far as sodium loss, is very diverse in terms of different people's sodium losses. Sodium sustains your thirst mechanism. So it's a way of preventing the loss of thirst in the late stages of a training event or competition so that you'll continue to drink more than you would otherwise. That alone should be a reason to use a hydration beverage if you're using water. Thirdly, sodium reduces urine output. This is critical at altitude. So high altitude is anywhere above 5,000 feet. According to the Institute of Altitude Medicine, and water intake is going to have to be higher, but sodium intake can also support the hydration process at altitude. So if you reduce urine output, you can keep the fluid that you consume in your blood for a much longer period. So some people get a lot of anxiety before an event, a competition, or a race. So that will increase urine output, so just keep that in mind. Your urine might be clear or pale, so that might indicate that you're really well hydrated. But if you're losing a lot of it because of stress hormones being elevated, just pay attention to that. So that's just another thing to keep in mind. And then I just want to mention again, sodium really improves the taste of sports beverages. So one that has some sodium in there is probably going to taste better than something that has no sodium in it. Studies show that hydration solutions should be containing anywhere from 120 to 170 milligrams of sodium per 8 fluid ounces. Notice that I'm mentioning per 8 ounces. Just keep that in mind when you look at labels. Sometimes they list as 16 ounces. So when you're comparing beverages, obviously just remember to look at the total serving size. So are you a salty sweater? If you are, you probably already know that you are. If you sweat and it stings your eyes, if there's a gritty feeling on your skin after a run in hot weather, if there are white streaks on your skin, those people are salty sweaters. Anyone exercising for 5 hours or longer should replenish sodium as a sodium supplement during that period, especially in hot and humid conditions. So we're not talking about sodium supplements in this webinar. We're just talking about hydration beverages. So the point that I'm trying to make is if you're an ultramarathoner, you're in a 5-hour event or longer, you're probably going to want to look for some way of repleting sodium through something other than just a hydration beverage. When sodium levels fall, so does your thirst mechanism. So salt, again, extremely important. I will add, again, that diet is the best way for salty sweaters to make sure that their sodium status is maintained. Advantages of carbs in the right amounts, I will emphasize, are shown here. There are 3 benefits of carbohydrates. First, they really enhance the taste. You'll drink more just because it tastes better. Secondly, you'll increase the absorption of the fluid because of the osmotic gradient that you create in your gut versus your bloodstream, as I showed you in that diagram. And then thirdly, they serve as a source of energy. So if you're looking at a hydration label and you only see, like I said, anywhere below 14 grams of carbs per 8 ounces is within the tolerability range that generally suggests a low enough osmolarity that you're probably going to tolerate it well. Just really assuming that the manufacturer took other measures to support an optimal osmotic profile. The source of energy part, this is key. A 6% carbohydrate solution is supported by many studies on athletes in a variety of sports and climates. And this is able to help maintain blood glucose. So a little bit goes a long way. Just a 6% carb solution can help keep your blood glucose high enough that you're able to perform better. So what's ideal? 4 to 8%. 6 is the sweet spot generally. You really want to make sure that there is a mix of different carbs in there: glucose, sucrose, fructose. These are sugars, and then dextrins, which are the complex carbs. Not all dextrins are created equally. I'll show you what I'm talking about in a minute. And before I do that, I just want to go back to my last point about carbs maintaining blood glucose. Just a little bit more detail here. 30 grams of carbs per hour is recommended. It can help you perform better, keep your blood glucose elevated, keep your mental energy up, your physical energy up, without slowing you down, without creating GI distress. So that would be 16 to 32 ounces of a 6 to 8% carb drink per hour. Dextrins are complex carbohydrates. They are glucose units that are hooked together that can be used for energy. These have the advantage. Cluster dextrin has the advantage, and the difference between cluster dextrin and maltodextrin would be cluster dextrin has this ring or loop structure, as you see on the bottom of that figure there. And cluster dextrin has the advantage of having a very, very low effect, if any, on the osmotic profile of the sports beverage. So that means you can add more carbs without compromising the tolerability of the beverage. And that's probably what you really want to shoot for, is a little bit more carbs, but something that you're going to tolerate well. This cluster dextrin has been clinically studied to show that it does it does not disrupt the osmotic properties of a solution to the point that they would slow gastric emptying and hydration efficiency. Moreover, cluster dextrin is easily broken down for energy. It has a very neutral taste, unlike other dextrins. So I've gone through the key points that you want to keep in mind when you're looking for hydration beverages to optimize your individual program. Obviously, whenever there is a discussion or a conversation about hydration beverages, the term comparison always has to come up because there are so many of them out there. Where do you start? Is your current strategy optimal? Could you do better? So this chart gives you some of the key parameters you want to look at when you're looking at different hydration beverages. Everything from percent carbs to osmolarity, the different types of minerals that are in there, and other ingredients. So clean hydration, which I'll expand on momentarily. This is a 6% carbohydrate solution, has a low osmolarity, also low. It has a carb concentration and profile that are conducive to tolerability and taste. So sucrose, dextrose, fructose are the sugars that are used. Many experts recommend that combinations of sugars are included in oral rehydration solutions. The sodium level is right where you want it to be, 180, and then 70 milligrams of potassium. It does have some magnesium in it, 25 milligrams. This is a chelated magnesium, so it's not going to cause any GI upset, but magnesium is lost in sweat, so you want to include it so that you make sure that you're replacing the minerals that you're losing. There is no chloride in clean hydration, mainly because chloride will increase the osmolarity and possibly compromise the tolerability. Calcium is in there as well at a low amount. That's a citrate form. A little bit of vitamin C, and then natural flavors. This is gluten-free, dairy-free, non-GMO, no artificial sweeteners, flavors, or colors. It's a very reliable and versatile solution that we designed based on very well-established beverage formulation principles and, of course, scientific research. Just for comparison, you'll see some other elite brands, A, B, C, D. Just to give you an idea of what is popular, what's out there as far as percent carbs, you'll see that the percent carbs tends to be lower. As I said, it's hard to get to a higher carb content without upsetting the osmolarity, but we were able to do it. The carb types vary depending on the formulation that you're using. So this is a reference chart just for your own purposes. If you want to refer to it, these slides will be available to you. I'll point out the fruit juice is probably something that you know not to use during an event, and that just all boils down to osmolarity, just to give you a sense of the range of values, 270 to 780. And really, again, it's all about how well you're going to tolerate it and how fast you're going to absorb it. The lower, the better. So clean hydration details are shown here, just the same information that I presented in the previous slide, just so you get an idea of what the label looks like. And hopefully now you have a better appreciation for what you really can't see on a product label when you're looking at a hydration beverage. It's really important to know your manufacturer and to understand what their standards are, and to understand their sources of ingredients and what they base this formula on. So this is based on, again, thorough evaluation of the most up-to-date medical literature and position statements from trusted authorities on this topic. Very, very versatile product. Pre-workout, during workout, after workout. This is also available in single-serve sachets as well. NSF International is the leading accredited third-party certifier of dietary supplements, functional foods, and supplement raw ingredients. It's considered the gold standard when it comes to testing for banned substances and ensuring that products are safe for athletes at all levels. This program is recognized by the NFL, NFL Players Association, MLB, MLBPA, PGA, LPGA, and the Canadian Centers for Ethics in Sports. So you can rest assured that your products are safe from anything that you should not be consuming. Certified supplements have to meet rigorous standards that include comprehensive lab testing and extensive evaluation of the manufacturing process to make sure that any contaminating substances or hidden ingredients are not added to a product. So if you want to learn more about this process, this program, just visit nsfsport.com or go to the Clean Athlete website for more information. And with that, I will conclude and open it up to questions. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Kelly. That was really informative. I've been taking notes the whole time because even though I also, I'm an athlete and I sweat a lot, I still forget some of those small details about what I'm looking for, how to hydrate properly. So that was great. So we had a few questions that came through. The first one is, do you have any recommendations for pediatric or teen athletes available, please?
Pediatric and teen athletes, really, really good question. I don't have those numbers at my fingertips, but I know they exist, so I will be happy to follow up with that information.
Oh, that's great. Okay. Yeah, it seems like, with so many children participating in more intense activities and sports now today than ever, that would be a great recommendation. So we can send that out with our follow-up email that will come out tomorrow. A lot of people have been asking Kelly about if these slides could be available afterwards. Is that something that? Okay.
Absolutely. Yeah, we created this presentation not only as a webinar presentation, but for something that the individuals who are interested can refer to as a kind of a source of reference info and calculations.
Okay. Fantastic. Oh, we have a lot of questions. Bear with me. One person asked if this is safe for diabetics, which I believe, yeah, that's an easy one, right?
Well, that's a good question, and it really depends on the individual, and it should always be the decision of the healthcare provider, just because diabetes is such a heterogeneous disease, and it really depends on their level of glycemic control and whether it's appropriate. Really just has to be the call of the medical provider or the educated coach, but I would choose the medical provider as the first source of that information. This product does not have a lot of sugar, so I will say that sports drinks kind of have this bad reputation of having a lot of sugar, but if you look at the label, 14 grams of sugar per 8 ounces to somebody who's losing a lot of glycogen and glucose while they're exercising is generally never going to be a bad thing, even for someone who does have some dysglycemia, but like I said, really needs to be the decision of the healthcare provider.
Right, and because we use the cluster dextrin, and that's kind of a more complex carbohydrate molecule, maybe we can look in to see if there's some research behind if they've done anything with glycemic control as well.
Yeah, you're always going to want to favor complex carbohydrates just in general for metabolic health. I mean, if you could just focus more on complex carbs throughout your diet as you're supposed to, there's no reason to become exempt from that rule when you're choosing a sports drink.
Great. So one person is asking, athletes who are traveling, especially air travel, why that contributes to dehydration, and if this product could be used for rehydrating athletes who are traveling and in between their training and competitions.
Great question. And at Clean Athlete, we have athletes here that travel and use clean hydration during traveling, just as a way of making sure that they're getting enough fluid. Water gets boring. Whatever it takes to maintain your hydration status, this is a very easy thing to do. You just keep it in your travel bag. You do have those single serving sachets that are very convenient that you can just add to any water bottle. So air travel, think about air travel is the air is very, very dry. So you might not feel it, but the relative humidity is very low in an airplane. And you're going to lose a lot of fluid just by breathing. So that's how you lose fluid. You breathe, and every time you breathe out, you're losing fluid because it's evaporating from your mouth. You also might urinate more. So those two things combined, it's similar to what you'd see at altitude, but not quite as pronounced. It's those two factors leading to dehydration.
Okay. That's good to know. I have a few more here for you. Okay. one person is asking how this compares to coconut water.
Oh, good question. Coconut water, I don't have a label in front of me, but I will make some general comments. The sodium content is going to be generally lower. Carb content typically is going to be lower. So it's about sodium and carbs. Those are the key things that would differentiate a sports drink from something that is more natural. Not to use the term unnatural, but if you take a natural product and like coconut and you take fluid from it and then you combine it with water, which is what they do, you get mostly water and very little of other things. And that's great for hydration in general, but it might not be enough sodium to sustain your thirst mechanism, and you might lose your sense of thirst if you're just using that in harsh conditions or during long periods of exercise. So it's all about looking at the label. The first thing you should always do is look at the label and look at the carbs, look at the sodium before you do anything.
Okay. So that's most of the questions that I can see that have been sent in. We are going to have these slides available, and the recording is going to be sent out to all the registrants after the presentation. It'll take about 24 hours for that to be sent out and to be available on the website. And oh, there's one more. Oh, some people are asking about Pickle Juice and Pedialyte. So there is a good question here, though. Is there a recommendation on the fluid volume per hour to drink in flight? I think that's a pretty relevant question.
Oh, good question. There probably is. I don't know what it is, but I'm sure if you just you could probably Google it. You know, I honestly I would do the same thing. Air travel, it's going to depend on a lot of the same factors we talked about. Your body weight. It's, you know, heavier people are probably going to be more prone to the dehydration during travel. Also, your pre-existing hydration status. So your hydration status over the last 3 days will affect how well you tolerate the travel experience as far as your hydration status goes. You know, the type of diet you eat. If you eat a really, really salty diet, you don't drink enough, you might suffer some more ill effects than somebody who, you know, has a more balanced intake of fluid and salt. So many things factor in. Medications, some medications can predispose you to dehydration, health conditions, and so forth. So again, you're going to get a range that's pretty broad. You know, it's not easy to get on a plane and, you know, weigh yourself before and then weigh yourself afterwards. It's really not practical. But just keep in mind that you're just going to be more sensitive to fluid losses, more susceptible to fluid losses. You should always have a bottle of water or a bottle of hydration beverage with you at all times when you're on a plane. Just you know, doing that will make a big difference.
All right. One last question. This one is about your thirst mechanism. So he's asking, when you say sodium helps with your thirst mechanism, are you specifically targeting the TRPs? I guess that's the thirst receptor.
Yes. I believe they're ion channels. So I don't know the answer to your question. I will be more than happy to revisit it as a follow-up. Going into the hypothalamic mechanisms of the thirst, the trigger of the sense of thirst. I'm not familiar with the biochemistry of it, but sodium will turn on that mechanism. So how it does that, it could be activating some kind of a receptor or a channel or some kind of a protein target to do that. It's probably doing something like that, but this is specifics I'm not, not aware of. But thanks for that question.
Okay. I keep saying one last question, but here's another question. Any suggestions on best practices for maintaining appropriate hydration for swimmers?
It's going to have to involve weighing the athlete before and after a swim session. It's the same as with runners or terrestrial sports. So looking at the individual, and also coaches and trainers should be able to identify at-risk members of their team. You know, the heavier individuals would be, you would prioritize those people as, take a look at their, first of all, figure out their salty sweaters. Second of all, I would focus on them first if you're going to encourage them to weigh before and after practice session a couple of times to get a sense of where their hydration strategy should hone in on. But it's just like any other sport. I mean, swimmers lose fluid. Water polo players lose a mean fluid loss of half a liter per hour. So, these athletes do have significant fluid requirements. But again, it is going to have to be tailored to the individual. So hopefully this webinar has given you some initial rules of thumb so that you can get started in individualizing every athlete you work with in terms of what they should be doing, what they might be doing wrong. A lot of athletes, like I said in the beginning, drink too little, or they just don't understand what they need to do to optimize their individual fluid replenishment practices. So if you deal with those two things, then it's very, very likely that you're going to improve the performance of multiple athletes on your team. So these are easy ways to improve performance, just covering some of the missing gaps that are so common and overlooked. Hopefully this has been informative to that extent.
Good, Kel. Thank you. And that's all we have today. So thank you, everyone. We appreciate your time. We appreciate your time, Dr. Kelly Heim, and taking us through this this really important topic of hydration. And with that, we will end our webinar. Thank you all, and have a great day.
Thanks, everyone.